Good afternoon. This week we are discussing Parshat BeChukotei. It is the last Parsha in Bamidbar, and next week we will begin with, in VaYikra, and next week we will begin with Sefer Bamidbar. I am calling this Parsha Brokenness or Wholeness. Each year, my amazing family comes together for our starim. It is truly an event that lasts until sometime between 1 and 2 a.m. or later sometimes, with lots of discussion, ongoing dialogue between 30 or so different Haggadot that are placed on the table, looking at the text intentionally, and applying lessons and portions of the narratives to our lives in so many ways. Children have taken to crawling under the table to fall asleep. Way too many wine bottles go into recycling. Can't imagine what the trash collectors think about us. Food has been amazing, and it truly feels whole. For one of the two starim, we choose a theme, and then we focus on that throughout the Haggadah and the Seder proceedings. My daughter Yoella, who advocated valiantly and successfully to host the starim in her new home this year as opposed to mine, chose the theme. It was brokenness. How we are not whole, and how we are all addressing the shards of too much pain in our lives at this point. A most appropriate choice, to be sure, at this juncture in our lives, when many families could not even come together and have important conversations, due to the brokenness that so many feel for so many reasons, or due to members of B'nai Yisrael being held in captivity, and for many who are suffering in so many ways. I chose two sections of the Seder to think about and talk about in this second Seder, and one of them was Yachatz. Now, have you ever researched what it is said about Yachatz besides the instructions to break the middle matzah in two and place the smaller part back with the other two matzot, hiding the larger one for the afikomen? I'll make this easy for you. Nothing. It was a very short undertaking. I checked all 40 plus Haggadot that we have in our house, different publishers, different foci, different topics. Nada. Break the matzah, put the larger part in the bag for the afikomen, and the smaller part placed between the other two matzot. This was just too easy, really. We break the matzah, we hide the larger part until we have fulfilled the many mitzvot associated with the Seder, excepting the final parts. We cannot come back to wholeness until we have completed what we set out to do. I find this theme an apt one for Parshat BeChukotei, the last reading from the book of VaYikra, with its rules and regulations and dictates. Our Parsha begins with the first two aliyot in which we read, Im b'chukotei telchu, ve'en mitzvotei tishmeru v'asitem otam. If you follow my statutes and observe my commandments and perform them, then you will be okay. And what is the reward? V'natati gishmechem ve'itam v'natna ha'aretz yevula ve'etz hasadeh yitem pri. I will give you your rains in their due time. The land will yield its produce, and the fruit will give its produce. Its fruit. The tree of the field will give its fruit. This notion sounds so familiar to those of us who pray daily, as it is the theme of the second paragraph of the Shema, and so much else that we learn. The notion is we do our part, God does God's part, and then we have wholeness. The text continues. Your threshing will last until the vintage, and the vintage will last until the sowing. In other words, you will never be without. You will always have a continual supply of food. You will eat your food to satisfaction, and you will live securely. You will live securely in your land. V'natati shalom be'eretz. I will give peace to your land, and you will lie down with no one to frighten you. I will remove all the wild beasts from the land. And no army, v'cherev lo ta'avor ba'artzachem. Cherev is sword. No sword will pass through your land. Although translations do interpret it to mean army. You will pursue your enemies, and they will fall by the sword before you. You will pursue many more than yourselves, but you will still succeed. I will turn toward you. Faniti alechem, v'frete v'chem v'harbiti etchem. I will make you fruitful. I will increase you. V'hakimoti epriti etchem, and I will make my covenant with you. In other words, God turns to us, we turn to God. This is the concept of wholeness. As we've discussed before, there's an equation that is set before us. If we do our entire part, God will do what God needs to do, and there will be this wholeness. However, a few verses later, we quickly begin a very difficult reading with the alternative options. I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt from being slaves. I broke v'ashbur matot alechem v'olech etechem kumimyot. I broke the pegs of your yoke and led you upright. God broke what was breaking us. And had the B'nai Yisrael stood upright, God healed the B'nai Yisrael, giving them means to be whole. However, v'im lo tishma'u li v'lo ta'asu et kol hamitzvot ha'eleh, v'im BeChukotei tim'asu, v'im et mishpatai tik'al, nafshechem levilti asot et kol mitzvotai. But if you don't listen to me, if you don't perform my commandments, if you are dismissive regarding my statutes and reject my ordinances and break my covenant, af ani aseh lechem, I will do the same to you. If you show brokenness to me, I will show brokenness to you. Then you will have shock, consumption, fever, diseases. You will have longing that is hopeless. You will have depression. Your enemies will eat all that you sow. You will be smitten before your enemies. Your enemies will rule over you. You will flee, but no one will be pursuing you. In other words, not only will you be chased by your enemies, you will be chased by your own fear and undoing. You will be your own undoing. You will be your brokenness. I tried to fix the brokenness and make you whole, but you will make the wholeness go away and be broken. This brings us to the midst of the Tochecha, the supreme indication of our brokenness for not having completed the circle of listening to God, learning Torah, and living according to its precepts. Here is despair. Here is trauma. Here is brokenness. In the cycle of our religious lives, we are presently in the midst of Sfirat HaOmer. To be specific, Shabbat is the 39th day. As we come toward the end of this cycle, we note that when we complete this cycle, we will find the wholeness of Shavuot. Shavuot is called Zman Matan Toratenu, that is the fulfillment of our hopes and our aspirations from Yetziat Mitzrayim, the time of the giving of our Torah, which is the completion, the wholeness of Zaman Chelutenu, the time of our freedom, which we observe on Pesach. This is about intentionality. We are given this gift of agency and ability to dedicate ourselves and our actions to each other, to the land, and first and foremost, to God, who has granted this opportunity of freedom, celebrated on Pesach, Zaman Chelutenu. In the status of having our own agency, we are to live intentionally. This is how we achieve wholeness in our world that is definitely broken in way too many ways. This takes effort. It requires our full attention. And we cannot take our status for granted or casually assume it's ours. Throughout a lot of these parshiot that we are in the midst of, and it will continue into Bamidbar, I've talked several times and will talk about the misdeed of just being casual, of not being intentional about our actions, of not really caring, of just letting things go where they go. We have to put in the work. We have to put in the effort. If we don't, we will lose what we are given. To amplify this notion, Rabbi Ozer Alport, an Eshet Torah rabbi, explains as follows. The Torah makes clear that many of the horrifying punishments enumerated in Parshat BeChukotei are punishments for behaving casually with God. Which sin is explicitly described as an example of acting casually towards God? The Shulchan Aruch rules that it is forbidden to engage in work while one is reciting the Birkat HaMazon. We learn this in the Mishnah Berurah 191:5. We learn that this prohibition includes not only a job which requires one's attention and mental energy, but even a trivial task or an honorable one, looking into the book of a Torah. Rabbi Alpert adds that this prohibition is not limited to the recitation of the grace after meals of the Birkat HaMazon, and it applies to any blessing or prayer that a person is saying. The Chafetz Chaim explains that somebody who engages in other activities while he is blessing God is embodying the concept of behaving casually with God, which we are never to do, demonstrating a casualness and lack of respect toward Mitzvot, for which the consequence is quite severe. Further, this intentionality and acting with such, and not casually, must apply to us in our other interactions with each other as well. Back to Yachatz. Brokenness is a fact of life. Anyone who has paid a great deal of money for a box of shmora matzah, as my husband does every year, and then opens that box to find some broken pieces, gets understandably upset. Even with expensive shmora matzah, there are no guarantees. However, I think that this experience conveys the same lesson as b'dikat chametz and bi'or chametz. With all of the additional preparations, costs, and intentionality involved in preparations for Pesach, we note that there will be some imperfections. And then we pray in acknowledgement of those imperfections that any chametz in our totally cleaned house, in which it was completely purged, is as if nothing. It is as nothing, no thing. So even in our wholeness, we acknowledge that something is amiss or broken. The accompanying Haftara for Parsha BeChukotei is from Yirmiyahu, Perek Tet Zayin 16, and it speaks further of this despair and of this brokenness. We read, Blessed is the person who trusts in God. The Lord shall be that person's trust. He will be like a plant, a tree planted by the water, and by a rivulet spreads its roots, and will not see when heat comes. Its leaves will be green, and in the year of drought it will not be anxious, neither shall it cease from bearing fruit. Again, here we see signs of nature to physically and tangibly explain what may not be able to be put in words in terms of the results of a successful and whole relationship between the human being and God. So, we turn to what we can see and acknowledge in our lives. But, the prophet continues, Ekav halev mikol v'anoshu mi yada'enu. The heart is deceitful above all things, and when, anosh is the word that's used here, it is sick, it is less, anashim, people, who we are, onesh with an ayin, punishment. Think of that shoresh and what it means about the inherent brokenness of being human. Who will recognize it? God searches the heart, tests us, gives everyone according to their ways, according to the fruit of their deed. As the throne of glory is exalted from the beginning, so is the place of our sanctuary. The Lord, who is the source of the hopes of Israel, Kol azavecha yevashu, all that forsake you, God, will be shamed, and they who turn away will be marked out on the earth that they have forsaken God and all that God gave us. And then we have this pasuk that we all know, Rifa'eni Hashem ve'irafeh hoshi'eni ve'avasha ki tilati ata. Heal me, God, and then I will be healed. Help me, and then I will be helped. For you are my praise. So, this formula may seem simple, but as we know all too well, it is anything but. Do all of the correct actions. Initiate them with the noblest of intentions. Brokenness will still be there. So what do we do with the brokenness? Do we walk away and say, that's it? I've heard from so many people in recent days, I've lost my faith in God. I've lost my ability to pray. How do we maintain that when we see all that is happening? And we know that this has been part of our narrative all along. I think it is the brokenness that A, reflects us as humans, and B, tests our faith, and C, sends us to this desire for wholeness. That is the reality of our lives. The broken matzot nishmar matzah box. Finding a piece of chametz after you've cleaned the house. This is the reality of our lives. A bit later in our Parsha, in chapter 26, we read as follows, indicating how we're going to heal the state of brokenness we cannot escape. This is after the Tochecha. V'afgam zo biyotam ba'aretz avehem lo ma'astim v'lo ga'atim l'chatan l'hafer v'iti v'zacharti lahem brit rishonim asher tzayti yatachan me'eretz. In spite of this, when they are in the land of their enemies and so broken, God says in chapter 26, I will still not cast them away. Neither will I hate them or destroy them utterly and break my covenant with them. In other words, we may have broken our part of the agreement, but God maintains God's. Why? For I am the Lord, their God. I have taken them out of Egypt, and for their sakes I will remember the covenant of their ancestors whom I brought forth out of Egypt in the sight of the heathen, that I might be their God, that I am God, I am the Lord. This is clearly a turning point in our text, parallel to what Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, Zichrono Shalom, teaches as a turning point in our history, or our understanding of it and our place in it. He calls this the turning point in the history of the human spirit. It is the birth of hope. Not hope as a dream, a wish, a desire, but hope as the very shape of history itself, the arc of the moral universe, as Martin Luther King Jr. put it. God is just. God may punish. God may hide God's face. But God will never break God's word. God will fulfill the promise made to redeem God's children and will bring them home. And I might add, God will also never destroy all of mankind, all of humankind, all of humanity, as we learned way back in the beginning of Parak Vav of chapter 6 of Parshat Breshit. This is wholeness. We end our book of rules and regulations. We've given all the statutes. We've given all the chukim. We've done all of it. We come toward the completion of the counting of the Omer. We get ready to approach Shavuot. For those of us who sit up all night and learn together, never forgetting or neglecting our human condition of brokenness. But as we turn to God and each other, hopefully, in our families and communities, we try to hold on to and continue to feel that we can experience more than a glimmer of wholeness. Chazak, chazak, v'nitchazek. Be strong, let us continue to be strong. let us continue to strive to be whole in the face of brokenness, which is part of the human condition. Shabbat Shalom to all. Lihitraat.